So, I am going to make a knife and film the whole process. I am not good at this. I am brand new to this. I think I'm 8 knives in, but 2 of my friends requested a work in progress sort of knife, and what I mean by that is it's not going to be perfect by any means, but they're wanting one of the early evolutions of what I hopefully will be able to do in the future. I'm going to be making a knife for Sean Pastucci, Shawnee Boy P, and then for Sammy Monez. I believe that's how you say her last name. But 2 awesome peeps looking to send them a knife. So it's going to start from a raw piece of steel, and we're going to work that all the way into a finished knife, the most finished that I can do. Little disclaimer, I am brand new to this. Like I said, I'm 8 knives in, and I have just done a bunch of research and find it absolutely fascinating. I'm going to make plenty of mistakes along the way. I'm going to not do things exactly how they should be done necessarily, but I'll take you along for the ride, show you exactly what I've done so far, and talk about the steps I'm going through. Let's do this. Knife making. So, step 1 is going to be finding a steel to use, the type of knife that or type of steel that you want to use, and then getting it into a rough shape that you can do stuff with. Now, there's 2 types of doing knives. You can do what's called stock removal, where you just get steel. Gotta shut this gate. Where you just get steel and you remove different pieces of the steel to basically work a knife out of it. So picture that's like you've got a piece of paper and you want to cut out a snowflake. You just cut out the snowflake shape and then you go from there. That's called stock removal. The other way is by forging, which is where you heat up and change the shape of some sort of metal, and then you grind it down to be a more finished knife. We're gonna do the forging and then the grinding down versus just the stock removal, because I think hitting a hammer with on a blazing hot piece of metal is super duper fun, and that's what I want to do. Okay, so I said we have to choose what kind of knife steel we're going to use. I'm going to use the spring steel out of a car. I went to a local junkyard and picked up a leaf spring from a car, not a coiled spring, but you're going to see it in a sec. It's this guy right here. It goes up under the tire, behind the tire, and basically makes it so the car can bounce around. Now, the type of steel that it is, I think it's 5150 or something like that. But the reason that we use this steel, the reason I'm going to use this steel is it's got a high carbon content relative to other steels, which means it's heat treatable. Heat treating allows you to change the molecular structure of the knife to make it so it can hold an edge and it can stay sharp, as well as be nice and flexy. So low carbon steels you can't do that to, so you can make the prettiest knife you want out of something like rebar and it's never going to hold an edge. It'll just dull right away. So I'm going to use this. It's not the easiest steel to work with always. I found that a 1084 and 1095 are much easier to use, but this was cheap. It was $30 for the whole spring, and I'm going to use a tiny little chunk of it for these knives. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to cut off using an angle grinder and a cut-off little blade to get a chunk out that I think will be the relative size that I'm going to need for each one of these little knives.
Glasses, mask, earplugs, angle grinder, chop, chop, chop.
One thing to note when you're buying an angle grinder for doing this kind of work, don't get a cordless one. The cordless ones run on a battery and they'll die. You think you're in there and you're like, oh, this is cool, cordless, it matches all my other tools. Get a corded one because you're gonna run through batteries like nobody's business chopping up steel. Cordless is cool, but not for chopping up steel in any sort of volume or any sort of density. All right, so that took about, I'd say 30 minutes. Let's see, yeah, 30 minutes to plug through cutting that off. There's better ways to cut stuff off, but angle grinder is the cheapest one, and it's what I already had. Especially with the toughness of the steel that we have on that. I tried to do it with a bandsaw, but my bandsaw is not nearly powerful enough. Just the blade wasn't right. So here's what we ended up with. Ow, 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 ow! They're hot. They're still hot. So I ended up with this little piece here. Ow! Sha! And this little piece here. And I'm gonna drop them on the ground. Jeebus. Because they're still really hot. But I'm gonna drop those in a bucket of water. I'm gonna cool them down, and then I'm gonna clean them up on my angle grinder, or not my angle grinder, my belt grinder right here. Now, could I clean them up on my angle grinder? Absolutely. In fact, in an effort to not waste belts that I have, because they're kind of expensive, I'm gonna clean them up on my angle grinder. The reason I'm cleaning them up is just that way when I pop them in the forge, they don't have rust and stuff on them. I don't know if that makes any difference, but to me, I like dropping them in there a little bit cleaner. So here's what they look like currently. I don't know if that's focusing. And then we'll make it so it's nice and shiny, kind of like you see on the cut on the inside here. Which doesn't really matter because I'm going to pop it in the forge and it's going to be dirty again. But let me clean this up with my angle grinder real quick. Alright, so real quickly, I switched out the head from a cutoff blade, which is a skinnier, thinner blade, or wheel, to a grinding wheel. And the grinding wheel is thicker and it's made to remove metal. The cutting wheel is thinner, so it can kind of slide through and cut, whereas this thicker blade or wheel will allow me to grind away layers of steel. So that's what I changed it to. Boom, boom. So I just spent some time grinding these down. Maybe you can see it there, but now it's shiny. Does that change things? I don't know, but I like it shiny. Going into the forge. It's gonna get black right as I toss it in. Now, something about these you'll notice is they're bent. That's the nature of spring steel. It comes bent. It's not perfect, polished, machine grade stuff. Now, when you're doing forging versus stock removal, this shouldn't matter too much because, hey, you got a forge, which then when you heat it up, you can change the shape of it. When you're doing just stock removal, you have to buy straight pieces of steel, things that are machined a certain way, unless you have ways of heating them up and then taking out warps and bends. So if you're doing forging, you can work with a whole bunch of different kinds of steels and recycle and all that kind of stuff. If you're doing just stock removal where you're cutting it out of another item, you're going to have really straight pieces of steel, and something like this would not work. That would be a very bent knife. Let's go do some forging. So this is my little forge setup, my forge and my anvil. This is an anvil, that's a forge. That's a Farrier's forge I bought off Craigslist for about 150 bucks. It's kind of beat up, and I took it and I sanded it down and then put a new coat of paint on it, and it works just fine. Is there ways that it could be better? Probably. I actually had to take out some of the inner brick and put in some more brick so it would not put this like fluffy, heat-resistant innards all over every piece of steel I put in there. But it runs off a little propane tank that needs to be changed occasionally. The thing is, if you run the propane tanks at too high a PSI, that little red thing, or this attachment, you can't see it, it's fuzzy in the screen, but it'll limit the amount of gas that goes into it, and if you run it at too high a PSI, pounds per square inch, I believe, it's going to freeze over the tank really quickly. So I run it at about 15 to 20, which heats up my steel just fine. I found that this steel, the spring steel, I've had to heat up at a slightly higher, like 20, 25. But after a while, no matter what I do, my gas canisters still freeze up, and I have to wait more time to forge another time. I'm gonna start with the smaller knife first, so Sammy's knife. I'm gonna go on the internet and I'm gonna find a small paring knife, or I'm gonna look in my little area, my commonly known as kitchen, find a paring knife that I can copy. I'm just gonna basically find the shape, copy the size, and then draw it on a little board so something I can compare it to once I'm hammering this out. So I'm gonna go do that right now, and then I'll come back and show that.